Athi River Basin, late morning. The current had changed. What had been a shallow line of water just 2 days ago now moved with force, thick with mud and broken branches, pulling at the edges of the riverbank. It was not a storm that caused it, just steady, unexpected rain higher in the hills that fed the stream. By the time it reached the lower reserve, it had already begun to rise beyond its shape, licking at the roots of trees and blurring the line between land and river. The patrol had been redirected toward the eastern crossing, a routine check after 2 impalas were spotted struggling upstream. Nothing about the call had suggested lions. It was Isaiah who saw it first, just a shape in the corner of his vision. A small movement low against the embankment. He stopped without speaking, squinted past the reeds. The shape moved again, a small paw dragging against the mud, slipping back. The color blended with the earth, sand-stained fur, soaked and flattened, barely visible against the slope. Then a faint sound, not a cry, more like breath caught in the chest. A cub, alone. They moved closer slowly. The river was only a few meters wide here, but deeper than it looked. The cub was caught in a bend where the embankment dipped in and the water curved aggressively, carving out a channel. Its body was pressed into a hollow beneath a jut of clay, front legs splayed and hindquarters jammed into the curve. Each time the current surged, it buried his face in water. Then he'd lift it, gasping. He did not look toward them. His ears were pinned flat, soaked. His tail was missing its tip. There was no sign of a pride nearby. No prints in the mud, no calls from the brush. Either he had been left behind or separated mid-crossing. The flooding had erased any trail. What they did know was simple. He couldn't climb out, and if he tried to move on his own, the current would pull him under. If they waited too long, he'd lose the strength to hold his head up. Isaiah radioed back to the mobile unit, voice low. Cubic male, maybe 6 weeks. Caught in bank cut. Needs lift. Rope, 2-man. There was no hesitation in the reply. 10 minutes. The team didn't crowd the edge. Only 2 stayed close. They kept their hands low, eyes soft. The cub made no sound. His body shook now, more from cold than fear. Water slapped against his ribs. His mouth opened once, teeth small and dull, a quiet gesture more instinct than threat. A warning he didn't have the strength to deliver. Isaiah stepped back and looked at the angle. The clay wall had eroded in a steep angle, impossible to descend cleanly without falling into the current. But downstream, about 3 meters, the bank sloped more gently. If one could enter there and move up through the water, staying low, the cub might not panic, might not move. The vet's assistant, Kilonzo, arrived first, already knotting the rescue rope around his waist. If he runs, he dies, Isaiah said quietly. Kilonzo nodded once. Then he won't run. The water was colder than expected, pulling at the legs with a silent force that built with each step. Kilonzo didn't speak. He moved slow, deliberate. Mud climbed up his calves. His boots slipped once. He steadied against a tree root and continued forward. The cub noticed him now. Its eyes widened not in panic but in blank awareness. It made no effort to flee. Its head tilted, nose dipping again into the current. Kilonzo reached the shelf and braced one arm into the slope above him. He extended his other hand slowly, letting it hover just above the cub's flank. The cub flinched once, then stopped moving entirely. In one movement, Kilonzo cradled the cub beneath its chest, lifted, and pivoted his body with the current's pull. The rope tightened behind him. Mud gave way beneath his feet, but he held tight. 2 rangers pulled from the slope above, bringing both out in a slow drag across the roots. When they reached the top, the cub did not resist. He was light, bones more than body. His chest moved, but the breaths were thin. He did not look at them. He only blinked, and then closed his eyes. He was safe, for now. But if his breathing stopped, if shock set in, the river wouldn't have taken him. Stillness would. The cub stirred again, faintly, but his breath was shallow and irregular. The ground beneath him had begun to shift, softening with each passing minute as the river crept higher, pushing into the slope where his body had been wedged. His front paw slid off the root once, and he tried to replace it, but the motion was slow, more reflex than strength. The water had not stopped rising. It curled now over the base of the embankment, touching his ribs in short, sharp pulses. He wasn't trapped anymore, not physically, but the body hadn't yet accepted that it was free. His limbs stayed tight, head low, eyes half shut, and the root he now gripped was no longer stable. If it broke, he would not survive the drag. The team moved quickly but carefully, measuring the slope by hand and eye. Kilonzo was already soaked from the waist down. He dropped his bag, uncoiled the line again, and secured the new harness around his chest with quiet familiarity. The current was stronger now, not roaring but pressing against the thighs with a steady force. Isaiah stood just behind him, feet wide for balance, holding the tail end of the rope and bracing it around a thicker tree trunk. No one raised their voice. No one rushed. Stillness in the body meant calm in the rescue. The descent this time was more technical. The bank had softened and fallen away near the center, creating a second ledge that curved inward. They couldn't walk along it. They would have to cross into the flow, then double back upstream, stepping carefully across hidden rocks slick with silt. If one slipped, the rope would stop the body from being lost, but not from breaking on stone. The cub lifted his head once more. His ears twitched, water sliding down his face. He was shivering now, full-body tremors that lifted his fur in tiny ripples. His mouth opened briefly, not to cry out, but to breathe wider. No sound came. His eyes moved, unfocused. He was barely present. Kilonzo began the crossing. The rope, stretched behind him in a soft arc, held steady by Isaiah. One foot moved forward, then paused. Water forced itself into his boots. He kept his arms low, balancing as the stones beneath him shifted slightly. The angle of approach would put him just beside the cub, not behind. That mattered. If the cub startled and twisted, he could slip fully into the bend. If he lunged forward, the suction near the drop might take him. Halfway across, the water surged higher around Kilonzo's knees. The rope tightened once. He stopped, waited, then stepped again. A branch broke off upstream, spinning in the current. It passed behind the cub, missing his body by inches. The movement stirred the water violently for a few seconds. The cub reacted, flinched, rolled slightly, and lost his grip on the root. Isaiah's voice was quiet but firm. Now. Kilonzo moved fast. 3 strides forward and he was there. He dropped to his knees, chest pressing against the clay edge, and reached forward just as the cub slid fully into the water. His hand caught the base of the cub's front leg, just below the shoulder. The skin was slick, the muscle limp. The cub didn't resist, didn't cry. His head dipped beneath the surface for a moment before rising again in Kilonzo's other hand. Mud covered his eyes. With both arms locked around the cub's midsection, Kilonzo called out, not loudly, but enough. "Pull." The rope drew back with slow, controlled tension. Kilonzo held the cub close to his chest, body curled inward to keep him from slipping. Each footstep backward was blind, dragging through water that now reached the ribs. The bank pulled at his weight. Isaiah grunted softly, adjusting his stance. The rope held. They rose, inch by inch, against the collapsing edge. At the top, 2 more hands reached down, gripping Kilonzo under the arms, lifting both man and animal onto the dry ridge. The cub didn't move. His legs hung limp. His eyes were closed, but his chest rose once, then again. They placed him on a canvas square, wrapped loosely in the corners to wick away the water. His head lolled to the side, tongue dry against his lip. He did not wake. "If he breathes, he lives," Isaiah said quietly. The sky stayed overcast. The river slowed just enough to draw silence back across its surface. Beside the bundle of canvas, the cub's body stayed still, but warm. The root he'd clung to drifted away downriver without sound. The cub's body rested on the canvas, slick with river water, limbs slack and cold. His chest no longer rose. No flutter of ribs. No swallow. Colonzo stayed crouched beside him, one hand on the cub's side, feeling for the shallow rhythm that had still been there seconds ago. Now it was gone. The canvas beneath the cub began to dry in patches where his fur no longer dripped. His ear twitched once, but it could have been wind. They moved quickly but without panic. Isaiah opened the side pouch of the med kit, removed the foil wrap, and passed it to the vet's assistant. The cloth inside was warmed by body heat and hands. Colonzo folded it around the cub's midsection. Not too tight, careful to leave the face exposed. Still nothing. His fingers moved up to the rib cage, pressed softly once, then again, then waited. The water inside the cub's lungs wasn't visible, but they could hear it faintly, a gurgling sound buried in silence. No resistance in the body, no flinch, no fight. One of the rangers pulled a sheet of dry canvas from the truck and angled it to block the breeze. The ground was cool and shaded, not ideal, but close. They didn't want to move the cub too far. Every second mattered. If breath didn't return within minutes, the systems would begin to shut down. If they were already shutting down, it meant the cub was slipping deeper than they could reach. Colonzo leaned in, tilting the head slightly to allow the airway to clear. He opened the mouth with 2 fingers. The gums were pale. A shallow pool of water trickled from the tongue. He lifted the chest gently with both hands, then released. Nothing. Again. Still nothing. They did not speak. They worked in rhythm. One kept time, one kept pressure, another kept watch. There were no sounds beyond the soft movements of canvas and breath. The cub's leg twitched. It was not a movement of waking, just a reflex, a nerve along the spine discharging. Colonzo looked to Isaiah but said nothing. They continued. A third round of compressions, this time just 2 fingers pressing into the small ribs and releasing. He was so light, too light. No fat left, only fur and frame. They didn't know how long he'd been trapped. Hours in that mud pocket, head dipping into water, lungs catching silt. What little strength he'd had was gone. What remained was only margin. The vet murmured. "Try once more." Colonzo did, lifted the chest, released, waited. Then it came, a sound like a cough pulled under water, wet and shallow. The cub's mouth opened again, eyes still closed, and air escaped in a jagged push. Not steady, but real. They leaned in. His chest moved. Just once, a ripple. Then again, smaller. Still unsteady, but rhythm was returning. The body stayed limp, but the lungs had not stopped. Not yet. Colonzo whispered, "Stay here." The cub didn't respond, but the small exhales began to come more regularly now. The body trembled, not from cold, but from effort. Each breath seemed to cost something. The paws were curled inward. The claws didn't extend. His face was slack, but he was breathing. They wrapped him tighter, tucked a dry fold around his side, and left space near the nose. He lay between 2 warmed packs now, with one ranger gently resting a hand against his spine, counting time aloud. If the rhythm held for 10 minutes, they could transport him. If it failed again, there was no second rope to pull him back. For now, the sky held steady. No more rain. No more movement. Just the faint rise of a tiny chest beneath coarse fur, and a silence none of them were willing to disturb. The cub's body had regained some heat, but not motion. The warmth came from the packs, not from within. He lay still, limbs curled as if braced for something long past. The shallow breathing that had returned earlier now slowed again. Barely visible beneath the towel wrapped around his midsection. His chest no longer moved with regular rhythm. Only his nostrils flared now and then, weak and uneven. One eye fluttered open once, the iris pale beneath grit and dried river water, then closed. There was no awareness in it, just instinct, half spent. Alonzo stayed beside him, knees folded beneath him in the silt. He didn't speak. His hand rested on the cub's shoulder, thumb lightly following the ridge of bone under the skin. No tension in the muscle, no pullback. The cub didn't respond to sound or light. A faint pulse still beat beneath the neck, but it was slow, thin, and drifting. The kind of rhythm that signaled collapse, not survival. Isaiah stood a few steps back, watching the tree line. No sign of a pride. No sound in the distance. Even the insects had quieted in the overcast warmth, leaving the bank in a kind of suspended breath. They had done what they could. The immediate danger, drowning, had passed. But now the body was shutting down from within. Cold exposure, fatigue, fluid in the lungs. None were visible, but all were known. Cubs in this state didn't last long, even with help. Especially not without a mother. The others stepped away slowly, giving space. But Alonzo stayed. He adjusted the towel again, slid his palm under the cub's jaw, feeling for strength in the hinge. It was slack. The mouth hung half open. He whispered, "Not yet." Just those two words. Then he reached for a fresh cloth and began wiping along the ribs, clearing the last layer of cold water and mud. The touch was gentle, not clinical. Slow, circular motions that moved in rhythm with breath, or where breath had been. A minute passed, then another. The chest didn't rise, but the body stayed warm. Alonzo reached into the pack, pulled out the narrow dropper bottle, and filled it with a sugar water mix from the thermos beside him. He moved the cub's head gently to the side and squeezed a few drops at the edge of the lip. Most of it dribbled down. He waited, then tried again. A twitch, almost nothing. Just a shift in the lower jaw as the fluid moved against the back of the tongue. Alonzo blinked, leaned closer, and held the head steady. A faint swallow. Then stillness again. He could feel time pressing. Not in panic, but in truth. If the cub didn't begin breathing soon, even shallowly, the warmth would no longer matter. Muscles would go rigid. The body would stop accepting effort, and all that had been risked in the water would fall quiet on the bank. One more drop. Another wait. The chest moved, a tiny rise like the slow pull of wind through grass. Then again, longer. The jaw twitched. The front paw shifted just slightly, claws pressing into the canvas in a slow scrape. The eye fluttered open again, and this time stayed. The cub did not lift his head, but his breathing had returned. Not steady, not strong, but real. The kind of breath that asked for nothing, only time. Alonzo didn't move. He stayed with the cub, hand resting on the shoulder, waiting with him. Around them, the light dimmed slightly. Afternoon shadows slid across the riverbank, soft and long. The others returned slowly, steps light, not yet calling out. They did not speak. They just stood in quiet, watching the rise and fall of a cub who had not chosen to stay, but hadn't left yet either. The rhythm of breath had steadied, thin but constant. The first cub now lay curled in dry cloth, wrapped with care, his chest rising just enough to keep the team silent. Every few minutes, one of them would lean in to check, counting to 4 between movements, touching a finger softly beneath the jawline. The tension had not lifted, but it had loosened. And with that space came the quiet pull of the landscape again. The river, still swollen but slower, and the wide arc of sand that curled around the opposite bend. Isaiah stepped out to walk the bank once more. Not to search exactly, but to shift his body, to see what else the water had moved. The earth had softened along the far edge, turning hard clay to silt. Branches littered the flood line. Old bones, too, from grazing animals pulled in upstream, already picked clean. nothing unusual. Until he paused. Just ahead, a narrow depression folded into the sand, shallow, no deeper than the width of a hand. Something in the middle glinted, not with light but texture, not bone, not stone. He moved closer, then froze. It wasn't movement that caught his attention. It was the shape. A head, barely visible, pressed against the earth like it had fallen there. Not placed, not crawling. The ears were flattened. The eyes were nearly shut, but not from sleep. Dried matter crusted one socket. There was no sound, no breathing he could hear, just the outline of ribs beneath skin, rising from the sand like the remains of something left too long. He didn't call out. He lifted his radio, thumbed it once, then twice. Short signals. The others were already in motion. By the time Kalonzo reached him, Isaiah had dropped to one knee, brushing gently around the edges of the body with his fingertips. The cub didn't flinch. His flank rose once, barely. This one was smaller, possibly by a week. No more than 5 or 6 kilos, the limbs thin and stiff, coated in a dry film of dirt. His front paws were curled under his chest as if he'd tried to dig himself into the sand for shelter. Or safety. Or out of confusion. His mouth was slightly open. His breathing, if it was there at all, was shallow enough to be missed without a hand. They wrapped him gently, lifting him free of the sand in one motion, sliding a flat board beneath his body to avoid disturbing the fragile legs. His head lolled to the side, then slowly tilted back as Kalonzo adjusted the wrap. This cub was colder than the first. His tongue was dry. There was no sign of external injury, no blood, no broken bone, but the silence of his body felt heavier. His jaw moved faintly once, then stopped. Back at the base site, the other cub stirred slightly as they approached. A sound escaped him, soft and short, not quite a cry, more of a hum caught in the back of the throat. The second cub didn't respond. His body remained still. Kalonzo placed him beside his sibling, layering a second heat pack underneath the hips and adjusting the cloth around the head to leave space for breath. The proximity mattered. If these two were siblings, and by weight, age, and markings, they likely were, then being near one another might pull instinct forward, not as comfort, but as a signal, a reason to remain alert, to stay tethered. The second cub exhaled. It was not a cough, just a release of air. No follow-up. The team watched, waiting for any further movement. One ranger whispered, "He's here." It wasn't a certainty, but it was enough. They monitored for signs of tremor, signs of pain, even rejection between the two. None came. The first cub pressed his paw forward slowly in his sleep, touching his sibling's hind leg. A faint twitch came in reply, not conscious, but not nothing. They didn't speak again. The river slowed behind them, lapping now at a new edge it had claimed. Birds returned to the higher branches. Somewhere upstream, a branch cracked, but no animal emerged. Beside the board, 2 small bodies lay close, one barely waking, the other barely here. The stakes had changed again. If either one slipped now, the other might follow. The air had stilled again. Cloud cover stretched low across the horizon, muting the warmth, keeping the bank in a quiet pause. The 2 cubs now lay side by side, each wrapped loosely in dry cloth, separated only by the fold of a towel. The smaller one hadn't moved since being laid down. His body was pliant, not stiff, but the breath was shallow enough to vanish between moments. The larger cub, the one first pulled from the water, had shifted in his sleep, one leg tucked in, the other extended until it brushed his sibling's flank. Kalonzo crouched nearby, refilling the warm packs and adjusting their placement. He changed the angle of one to better catch the body's center. The pulse in the first cub had grown more reliable. Faint, but present. The lungs had cleared enough to sustain him. His ear flicked when touched. His eyes remained closed, but the system had steadied. He was no longer in crisis, just recovery. The second cub remained in question. His breath, when it came, was like vapor, exhaled without sound or pressure, a flutter at the base of the ribs. The mouth hung open slightly, drawing air through a dry tongue. Time moved slowly between each sign of life, and the others didn't look away for long. At some point between minutes, a sound began to rise, soft, low, nearly hidden beneath the hum of insects. It wasn't a cry or distress call. It had no urgency, just a rhythmic exhale, like breath caught behind the throat. The larger cub's body vibrated faintly, not shaking, just responding to the motion of air. The sound pulsed at intervals. 1, pause, 2. Each release came with a quiet lift of the ribs. He was no longer just breathing. He was communicating in the only way he could, with breath. The smaller cub did not answer at first. His face remained still, pressed into the cloth. Then, slowly, his paw twitched. A drag across the towel. His ribs moved, not much but enough to echo the rhythm. And then from his throat came a second sound, barely audible, lower, thinner. But it matched. Kalonzo leaned closer, one hand steady on the cloth between them. Neither cub opened their eyes. Neither lifted their heads. But the sounds continued, overlapping now in strange harmony. 2 threads of life running parallel. The rangers said nothing. No signal was given. They simply listened. In many cases, orphaned cubs in this condition would not recover without medical transport. Oxygen, fluid, nutrition by tube, but these 2 were not collapsing. Not anymore. Their systems were fragile but active. Their bodies were thin but warm. They had begun to tether themselves to something. Not human, not safety, just to each other. The vet gave a short nod. No treatment yet, no injections. If the sounds held for 30 minutes without fade, they would monitor and feed. If they faded, they would reassess. But for now, stillness was no longer dangerous. Stillness was shared. The grass around them had dried since morning, bent low from the weight of earlier rain. A breeze moved across it now, pressing the stalks in one long wave that curled toward the edge of the embankment. The cubs did not flinch. They stayed curled, exhaling in low, uneven pulses, 2 points of breath in the shape of sleep. The only risk now was silence. As long as the sound held, so did their place in the world. The sounds from the cubs had softened. Still there, but fainter now, no longer in rhythm, just small traces of breath like whispers beneath the cloth. They hadn't moved in 20 minutes, not out of danger, not stable, but holding. Kalonzo adjusted one of the warm packs and laid his hand lightly over the larger cub's flank. The skin gave a little under pressure, ribs more visible than muscle. The smallest one didn't react to touch at all. His ears lay flat and his limbs had drawn in close again, fetal and inward. Neither cried, neither stirred, but both remained. The others were beginning to pack quietly, preparing for the slow drive back to the outpost before full dark. A shallow carrier had been lined with canvas and straw. The cubs would go together, side by side, close. They would monitor them through the night, start fluids at first light if needed. No one was optimistic, not yet. Cubs found alone like this rarely made it, especially without clear signs of a nearby pride. But they were alive, and that was still something. A sound came then. Soft, like brush moving against itself. Not wind. A pause followed, then again, closer. Isaiah turned, eyes narrowing toward the far end of the clearing, where the reeds grew taller and tangled back into the scrub. His hand lifted, not in alarm, but in signal. No one moved. The clearing fell still. From between the reeds, a shape emerged, low and deliberate. Not the slinking movement of a predator. No crouch, no tension in the shoulders. She was walking, though one leg dragged slightly behind the others, stiff at the joint. Her ribs showed clearly under the loose skin. Her coat was darkened with water and mud. Her head hung low, not from submission, but from exhaustion. A lioness! She didn't pause. She didn't sniff the air. She walked as if she already knew where to go. Her pace was slow but unbroken. When she reached the edge of the open earth, she stopped. Not a growl, not a sound, just stillness. The cubs didn't react. They didn't lift their heads or call, but the larger one blinked. His ears twitched once. Then again. She didn't approach immediately. Her eyes moved over the humans, not in challenge, but in distance. The kind of look given from a species used to being watched but not touched. She did not flinch. Her body remained quiet, only the slow rise and fall of her chest marking the time. Then she stepped forward. Just once. Another step. A third. Isaiah and Colonzo stepped back, slowly giving space. No sudden motion. No sound. The others did the same. The lioness walked up to the bundle on the ground and lowered her head. Her nose touched the cloth, gently. She moved it aside with the side of her muzzle, revealing the cub's scent beneath. The first cub stirred. Not much, just a slight lift of the chin. The second remained still. She leaned down and nosed him too, this time pressing along the spine from shoulder to flank. Then back to the first. Her breath was steady, her mouth closed. She lay down slowly, folding her legs beneath her, not between the cubs, but near them, close enough that her warmth touched theirs. Her eyes remained open, watching nothing in particular. The team stood several meters back now, not retreating, but giving the moment its shape. There was no claim, no urgency, just presence. No one would touch her, no one would separate them now. If she chose to move, they would let her. If she chose to stay, they would wait. The sun had dropped low behind the ridge, and the reeds around them swayed softly in the dusk breeze. The light turned the grass silver. The only sound was the steady hum of the river just beyond reach, and in that silence, 3 bodies rested. Not whole, not safe, but together. The lioness had not moved for over an hour. Her body lay curved around the cubs, not sheltering, just present. Every few minutes her head would lift slightly, eyes scanning the edge of the grass or resting briefly on the men nearby. But there was no tension in her muscles, no warning in her gaze. She had accepted the stillness, or she had decided it was not her enemy. The cubs had shifted closer during the last stretch of dusk, though it was unclear whether they moved on their own or through the gradual sinking of the cloth. The larger one now rested against her foreleg, chin pressed lightly to the slope of her paw. His eyes were open but not alert, glassy, dulled by the fatigue that had not yet let go. The smaller cub remained half-curled, only his breath offering proof that he still held on. His tail flicked once, then stopped. A soft call rose from the grass nearby, low and drawn out, not urgent. The lioness did not answer it, but her ears turned. She looked toward the eastern ridge. The call came again, further this time. Drier, then silence. She stood. Her movement was slow, deliberate, each leg rising with care before placing down again in silence. The leg she had dragged before now stiffened under weight, but held. She leaned into it, testing, then turned back to the cubs. She nudged the larger one gently at the shoulder, once, then again. He lifted his head, unsteady, then pushed his body up. His back legs folded awkwardly beneath him, and he paused before adjusting. He did not cry out. He simply followed. The smaller cub stayed down. She bent to him, more insistently now, and nudged the back of his neck. Her muzzle pressed forward, then again. He moved, first in twitching paws, then in a shiver that passed through his ribs and shoulders. It wasn't graceful, it wasn't confident, but he stood. One foot slipped, then corrected. His breathing remained shallow, but it came with effort. His eyes stayed half-closed. The lioness waited. The two cubs stood beside her now. One leaned into her. The other wobbled slightly, legs adjusting with every step. Neither walked cleanly, but both walked. The rangers did not follow. They stood in a line several meters back, silent, unmoving. No camera, no final check. The moment was not theirs. Their job was done, and still not finished. Because what followed could not be assured. The cubs might not make it to morning. The lioness might not rejoin her pride. The night might take what the river had failed to, but they had done what they could, and nature would take the rest. The lioness led them slowly across the edge of the clearing. Her body moved with the same steady quiet that had brought her in. The cubs trailed behind, close but not clinging. They followed by instinct, not trust. The older one stumbled briefly but regained balance. The younger paused often, head low, tail dragging. The grass thickened toward the east, where the ridge rose and caught the last light of day. The sound of the river had faded now to a hush. The sky above the clearing turned a soft gray blue, deepening with every step they took away. When they reached the edge of the brush, the lioness turned once, not fully, just a glance behind her. Then she continued. The rangers did not speak. Behind them, the earth was marked only by faint paw prints in the wet dust and a few scraps of cloth left drying on a rock. The packs had already been closed. The heat pads turned off. The work had paused, not ended. Across the ridge, the wind stirred the tall grass, brushing it in long, even lines. And somewhere between river and dusk, a mother walked back into the wild and her cubs walked with her.